Awesome. Is it recording? Okay, it is now recording. That's bad. I messed that up. Hi, everyone. I am Jen Bonnett, and I am the Executive Director of the Creative Coast. I'm also a serial entrepreneur. I usually say recovering since I'm not actually pursuing any entrepreneurial endeavors at the moment, although I would say that even running a nonprofit during this crisis is quite entrepreneurial. And but I have about 20, well, I guess almost 30 years experience in tech, and 20 of that is in specifically in technology startups, not larger companies. And so in my role at, well, my last startup failed. It was called Nexpense. It was an expense management solution, and it just outright failed. And well, actually it was acquired, but part of the reason it didn't really take off and get to the large consumer base that I hoped was not really understanding the market. And so so I got really into this lean startup methodology and Steve Blank, a customer development model. And some of this, for some of you, is going to be very familiar, but some of this is going to be new for some of you. But it is kind of what are the biggest issues, especially that I've seen in the last 10 years that I've been primarily coaching that startups make when they launch their company. And it's really about, right, when you have an idea for a business, you have a lot of assumptions, right? And you have a lot of assumptions that have to be proven in order to move forward towards success. And if your assumptions are wrong, then it may be very difficult for you to assume, to actually have success, right? And so these are 9 deadly, basically, assumptions that are potentially toxic to your new venture. The first one is assuming you know what the customer wants, right? This is the biggest issue that I see in very, very early stage customers. You come in and you believe you know what your customer wants, right? You have an unwavering belief that what you have in your head, this idea that you have in your head, is what they need, right? And you believe that you know the method that you're going to sell it to them, right? And the reality is that you have a very strong opinion and some very strong assumptions, and that most likely not all of them are true. But if you build your startup based on only the things that you have in your head or that you write down in your quote unquote business plan, you are likely to fail because you haven't taken the time to truly understand your customers' needs, and you don't really understand how they want that product or service to be delivered to them. All right. The only exception to this is if you are the customer, right? If you scratch your own itch, you are the customer. Sometimes this works for you. But if you don't truly understand your customer, that is the number one thing. It's just truly not knowing who your customer is, what they want, and making a lot of assumptions around it. The second one is that you know what features to build, right? This happens a lot with technology founders because part of your assumptions is, oh, this is the feature list that my customer needs, right? And understanding and believing that you know what every single feature that they need is because you've got 10, 20 years experience, right? And not going out into the world to understand what features are most important to the customer, right? There's usually, if you're truly solving a problem for a customer, the customer will embrace ugliness in order to get that problem solved. So all the bells and whistles don't need to be there. So what is that fundamental nugget that needs to be there in order to add value to the customer such that they're willing to use your ugly product for a period of time until you get it pretty, right? The next flaw is focusing on the launch date, right? So traditionally you would set a launch date. It's often around an event. I launched my last product, or I was trying to launch my last product at Venture Atlanta. I guess it was probably 2009. I sold that company in 2011, so it's probably around 2009. We were building a product. We're trying to launch it at Venture Atlanta. That's in October. We really, we started in May, but we were all part-time. We got really serious about it in the end of the summer because nobody gets really serious about product development in the summer. We got really serious in the August, September timeframe, and it really wasn't launch ready. I could demo it. It was stable enough that I could demo it on my phone, but I couldn't say, go download it from our website, go download it from the App Store, because it wasn't ready. It just wasn't stable enough, right? And it's oftentimes what happens is that the launch date is driven by an executive decision that says, hey, we have to get this out here by this date. And it's not viable. It doesn't make sense. And if the CEO person is not the technology person, they don't understand the technology process, then there's a lot of conflict in the relationship between the tech team and the CEO. There's also potential conflict with investors. So if you've taken any seed capital outside money, you don't launch on time, people are like, why didn't you launch, right? And so it's really good to focus on, hopefully, understanding that technology products launch in waves. It's release, test, put code, test, release, code, test, release, code, test, release. And sometimes, actually, my last big startup, we got into the phase of we released something every week. Every Wednesday night was a release, right? We did that because we didn't want to work on weekends. So we released on Wednesday night, so if there was a bug, we could fix it on Thursday. If you release on Thursday or Friday nights, you might have to work all weekend fixing the bug. But we wanted to be nimble. We wanted to be constantly releasing new products. So we set up a release schedule, and it was, you know, whatever was ready went out on that date. We had lots of projects, lots of different new features being added at different times, but it was whatever was fully tested and really ready to go out went out on that date. Right, and the other thing to think about is if you're launching and expecting revenue, right, that can get extra tricky too. And some of this ties into later stage startups that are venture backed or trying to recognize revenue in a certain quarter. You have to ship product in order to recognize that revenue. So if you're not shipping product, you don't recognize the revenue. It's a little bit less of an issue with SaaS companies because they're constantly shipping product. But if you're releasing something on an interval, like a hardware device, see me, I'm doing this, a hardware device, you know, in order to recognize that revenue, they're going to have to ship the hardware device. So, right, and then emphasizing, number 4 is emphasizing execution instead of testing, learning, and iteration. Right, big companies that are already in the market and have a business, have a customer base, and have found product market fit typically, right, have an idea of what is known, what are their customers, who are their customers, what do their customers need, right, what is their pipeline of sales look like, you know, what does a sales cycle look like, how long does it take from first contact with potential customer to turn them into an actual customer, right? They know all these things. And so they can put together a plan that says, if we call 100 people, dialing for dollars, if I call 100 people that are potential customers of my product this month, I can forecast that 2 will say yes with relative certainty, because I know who my customer is. We've been doing it month after month after month, right? And we know that. Well, startups don't. Startups don't know that. Their financial models that they show to investors are full of assumptions, right? And so, especially if you've taken any outside capital or you're talking to investors, you want to be marching in line to your financial model, right? So startups need to emphasize testing and learning and iteration. So what I mean by that is, what can you put into the market to test your customer's interest, right? Just test their interest to see if they're interested. Right, my best example of this is Dropbox. When Dropbox first launched, before they took outside capital, they put together a video, right? So the system was not done, but they put together this video that made it look done and put this video on a landing page and drove developers to it. And developers signed up for pre-beta, right? 90,000 people signed up for pre-beta in about a week, right? So they knew that the marketing, the language that they were using, and the product that they showed scratched together in this video fit a need for that target customer. And they were able to go to actually take that to investors and say, hey, we had 90,000 people sign up for a pre-beta. Now, 6 weeks later, they launched the pre-beta and they had to continue to deliver on that. But that's an idea of they put a test out in the world and they learned from it, right? Another company that I worked with at ATDC was called Digital Ascent, and they were the first people really to put your check-in process at doctor's offices onto a tablet. And this was kind of 2009-ish, 2009 to 2011. They were graduating ATDC when I first joined. So they had started out actually with building physical tablets because there was really no iPad yet. By the end, they were running on iPads. But they took a tablet, put a click-through prototype on it, and went to hospitals and all different types of doctors' offices saying, hey, are you interested in our software, right? This was their test, right? And they had made a click-through prototype. So you fill out screen 1 and they enter the name. And they go to click submit, it goes to screen 2 and the name shows up automatically. Well, it was just HTML. There was nothing behind the scenes. It was just a prototype. And by doing so, they found out that dermatologists and orthopedic surgeons really liked the software, right? But they found out hospitals didn't want it, and regular family doctors didn't want it, and all different types of specialists didn't want it, but dermatologists and orthopedic surgeons wanted it. So that was an example of a test. From there, they went out and was able to raise money and build a team to actually write the software that met specifically their target market was large dermatology offices. And the reason they did that is because they could upsell products on it, right? And the dermatologists loved the idea of filling out your profile and being upsold on Botox at the time, right? So number 5 is writing a business plan that doesn't allow for trial and error, right? Again, traditional businesses that have been in business for several years, aside from times like these, kind of have a flow. And I know if I take these actions, it will lead to this type of activity, this number of customers, this number of sales, you know, and they kind of have a history that they can look back at and kind of look at it, build out a business plan moving forward, that if we presume we keep hitting these milestones, this is what's going to happen. Startups don't know that. Startups don't know that when 100 people come to your landing page that only 2 are going to fill out the email and give you an email. And from there, of the 2 that fill out the email, you know, 1 is going to take a call with you and possibly be sold or do the webinar. So while we've made up these crazy financial models that are full of assumptions and that we have to do in order to raise investment capital of any sort, we don't really know that. And our financial model is not really a static thing. It's just a way to show investors that we're thinking through what's going on. Like, you know, back to I make 100 calls and from that, I get 2 customers 3 months later. We don't know that. We're just making it up, right? And so we need to allow for trial and error. In that, we need to have flexibility and understand. And this comes into the next one a little bit, in that it's really about hiring in some cases, right? Startups don't need a CEO, right? 2 people that are co-founding a company and arguing over who needs to be CEO. Well, who are you CEO of, right? Or president of, right? And so there's all these titles that a bigger company has: chief financial officer, chief technology officer, chief CEO, you know, VP of sales, VP of marketing, chief marketing officer, that are really in some ways very meaningless in a startup, right? And people get caught up on job titles, right? And it becomes sometimes problematic in these startups. I've seen startups blow up because they had somebody in sales that really was never going to be a VP of sales. And when they actually needed a VP of sales, you know, they brought in a VP of sales and the person that had been selling for them for 3 years quit, right? Or the same thing happens a lot with the chief technology officer. They bring in a technologist and they're a junior person and they're really good. They build the product. You know, they build that first minimal viable product and they're an awesome architect or software developer, but like they're not cut out to manage a team of 12 developers and 3 testers. And so you have to be really careful in startups about titles, and really think through, you know, what that means, right? Startups, you know, should start out small, should grow only as revenues and or traction shows. And at this point, you know, it's important to identify roles. One of the things that we've done in every single startup that I did is we didn't start out with C people and we didn't start out with VPs. We started out, everyone was a director. And the assumption was, as the founder, who was the director of technology, that if you were the right person for the job as the company scaled and grew, that you would be chief technology officer, but it wasn't a guarantee. It was, hey, you may not like it being chief technology officer and having 100 people work for you and not really doing the tech work anymore. You might want to be more chief scientist or lead architect. And so let's start out everybody down so that if we have to hire above us, it's not confusing. Right? And, you know, when we talk about sales in startups, it's, you know, sales and marketing are 2 different things. I had to explain this a couple of times to startups recently. Sales and marketing are very different things in big companies. They are one and the same in most startups. You don't have the bandwidth and budget to hire a chief marketing officer and a chief executive for sales, right? So you know, startup founders need to not focused on job titles and more focused on what role are they playing. And honestly, in a startup, if you ever say that's not my job, you probably don't belong in a startup, because everything is everybody's job. So I'm warning people about being too focused on setting up traditional job titles early on in your startup. Executing on a sales and marketing plan. So a lot of this comes down to I read a lot of business plans or financial models that say on this day, we're going to hire a VP of sales. And this usually comes from a CEO that doesn't want to sell. Because the reality is the CEO needs to sell. Probably for 3 years, the CEO needs to sell. You know, and so they think about, okay, I'm going to hire a VP of sales. Well, VP of sales from traditional companies don't actually sell. They manage salespeople. So your first hire for sales, when you are able to hire a salesperson, actually needs to be a salesperson, right? And a VP of sales is going to come in later, right? All right, in a big company, there is, you know, sales forecasting, and it's relatively accurate. You've been doing it for years, right? There's a marketing plan. You've been doing it for years. In a startup, everything is a test, right? Everything is a test. Oh, that one didn't work as well as we like. Let's do this one. So the marketing plans are really fluid. What was that? Mint.com back in the day. You know, the guy that helped that company grow came in, interviewed with the CEO for a marketing job, and the CEO asked him for a 90-day plan. Right, and so he's like, well, all right. So he wrote down on one page of paper a 90-day plan. He was hired, and they ran with it, right? One piece of paper, a 90-day plan. How would you market Mint.com, right? And he got hired, and he's now rich and famous startup guy. But he's like, number one was flexibility. Like, he's like, I'm going to try this, 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 I'm going to try this. And out of those things, the 3 that work, I'm going to keep doing, right? And so there's this, big companies have a sales and marketing plan, and they execute against it. Startups have to have a plan, but they have to have the wherewithal to know that it's probably wrong, and they're going to pivot and change quickly. And that they have to put something in the world, test it quickly, understand if it's working or not. If it's working, do more. If it's not working, shut it down and move on to the next path, the next option for marketing. And that's hard, because sometimes you don't know if it's working. Like, you can be on Good Morning America and it could still not be working, right? You're getting tons of press, but you're not getting sales, right? And then you have to think hard about why is that. Let's see, next. Okay, this is a big one. Number 8, prematurely scaling your business based on presumptions of success. So you have your plan, you have your forecast, you have your financial model, right? And then you assume that you're supposed to start hiring people. You assume success, and you start hiring per your plan, right? Your financial model that you gave to your potential investors said that in March of 2020, you were going to hire 2 people. Actually, the Creative Crest was supposed to hire 2 people in March of 2020. Guess what? Creative Crest hired 0 people in March of 2020, right? Because you have to deal with what comes up, and you have to be realistic about it, right? And I had to go back to the board and said, I know we were going to hire, the first week of April, I said, I know we had scheduled to start hiring people right now, but it doesn't make sense. And they all agreed, but so you have to look at it, and you have to be like, okay, does hiring this person, does our success, does the level of revenue, the level of traction, because sometimes revenue follows far behind, does it make sense for us to hire right now, right? Otherwise, and this can be beyond hiring. This can be also related to systemizing processes, right? one of my favorite examples for like a kind of bootstrapped, pulled together startup is Groupon, right? They had a WordPress website where they posted a deal a day with a PayPal button, and they took orders, right? Those orders were turned into physical certificates that were mailed to people by actual temporary staffers creating PDFs in the back office. They got to the point where they had 200 people doing that before they actually automated the process, right? Now, they could have had 3 or 4 successes, you know, a week into, hey, we've done 5 days worth of business on Groupon, 1 deal a day, and we're making money. We should start automating this process and putting resources towards automating this process, that they still didn't know how it would work, right? It was almost a year and a half later that they actually released the software that did all that work for them, right? And so it comes down to like, is the process really ready to systemize? Are you really ready to hire that person to move to the next level? Or is the model truly working to the point that you should automate or hire and start to scale, right? So companies that scale too fast, either through systemization, right, that then there's technical debt if you change the process, right, or hire too fast, tend to fail because you're burning cash, right? And then the last one is management by crisis, right? So startups make mistakes every day, I guess is the bottom line, right? Startups make mistakes probably every day, and how you deal with them leads to what success or failure, right? So trying to think of a good example that I can give. So a lot of them have to do with co-founder issues that I find, right? You know, the leadership at one stage of a startup is typically very different from the leadership at a later stage. So an early stage startup, it's actually really, really beneficial. Actually, I would say early stage startup founders tend to like every day to be different. That's why they created their startup, right? They were bored in the normal, I get up and I do this from 9 to 5, and I see this thing that needs to be solved, and I'm gonna go solve it. And when you're starting a startup, very early stage, every day needs to be different. Every day is fun, every day is an adventure. There's ups and downs, like there's, you put an ad on Facebook and all of a sudden a ton of people come to the site, and now you're watching, do they place an order, where did they go? And Google Analytics real time, you can actually watch where they are right now, and all this stuff, right? Very exciting to see what's going on, right? Well, the next stage is, okay, wow, this is working. Now every day it starts to look the same, and now it becomes systemizing and processing. So a lot of times I've seen this situation where the CEO, founder, can't pivot into the everyday founder, right? Investors, customers want the company to be consistently high quality, the same, producing the same every day. Early stage startup founders are often a little ADHD, a little possibly manic depressive type people, and they'll come in with a new idea and they'll change course or add some new feature or add something that causes everything to crash, right? And so consistency at the next stage becomes important. And so, at some point you have to move past, in very early stage startup, management by crisis works, right? But later on, management by crisis does not work, right? And I think the example in the slides is, the company built a product, went to ship it, put it out into the marketplace. the very first, sales weren't happening, so they fired the quote unquote VP of sales. They brought in a new guy. The new guy said, well, it's not working because it's not the right product. We have to start over, right? And that is a real cash problem, right? But I've seen one of the companies I worked with at ACDC is a influencer marketing platform, Sidekick, and it was all over the place for the first 2 years. It had funders, it had a great team of really people, very flamboyant founder, and really rock star CTO, but they were all over the place. And the board said, no, we're done. They fired the CEO, promoted the CTO to the CEO as an interim position, and said, figure it out, make it work, right? And they went from consulting and a product that sort of worked to okay, we're going to scrap 90% of the product and we're going to focus on this little piece that people keep commenting on, and that's what we're going to perfect, and that's what we're going to put into the world. And they're still in business today because they made those decisions. Because the previous CEO was going, okay, we're not making money on the made that product, so let's add more features, let's add more things, let's add more, and then let's also do consulting on the side because we need the money. So the team was just all over the place. And what they really needed to do was find the one thing that was working, go all in on that, and focus. And get out of this management by crisis. Oh, we're short on cash today. Where do we go? How do we make more money today? Okay, we're gonna stay the course. We know that people like this part of the product. Let's keep going. And that's really all I had. I guess the main takeaways are I have fully embraced the lean startup methodology and really believe that you have to understand your customer. You have to understand your customer's needs. You want to walk in the shoes of the customer if possible, and design your product and or services around that, constantly getting feedback, right? And being very careful and intentional about how you start to scale from 1 customer to 2 customers to 10 customers to 100 customers. And at what point you bring other people in to be touch points with the customers and other people to help systemize or build processes around what is working, right? And if you are thinking about outside investment, always be thinking about how can I communicate to my board about how we're testing these things. And early stage investors over the last few years have gotten really used to the startup customer discovery, lean startup language around, here's our hypothesis, this is how we're going to test it, and these are the assumptions that's going to show that we can actually move forward. And so being really honest with any potential early investors and not giving them a hockey stick curve financial model that isn't meant for, okay, well, we think if we do these things, we're going to get to this stage. And then when we're at this stage, we're going to do these things to get to this stage. But right now, we're really focused on that first stage, improving the model and getting to that. And, I tell people all the time, if you're raising money, even if you're just starting to talk to investors, send them an email update every month and tell them bad news. Because most people don't tell their potential investors bad news. But if you're starting open and honest dialogues with potential investors and you're saying, well, here's what's happening and here's what we had hoped was going to happen, but here's what really happened and here's how we're trying to fix it. Do you have any suggestions? You're building credibility with an investor that will, last a lifetime, because you're not trying to smoke them and say everything's great. Every startup has problems every day, honestly. There's issues every day in a startup. And so staying the course, communicating with your investors, communicating with your team, and kind of being careful in your growth while ensuring that you truly understand your customer, you truly understand the market, you truly understand their needs, is how you build a slow and steady successful startup. Any questions?
Yes, this is Miriam, and I'll put
Hi,
my.
Miriam.
This was absolutely fantastic. I mean, as expected, but I think there are people participating. But how do you? Just a question: how are we Creative Coast doing on getting people to listen to these? Because you're recording, correct?
So I haven't really been watching the YouTube statistics as much as the participants. This is one of the smaller classes that we've had in the last 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I would say we're averaging 12 to 20 in most classes. And then we are posting online, so we are getting views. I am trying to track the statistics on a month-by-month basis.
Yeah.
The things that I'm finding most interesting since kind of our pivot to online is just how much our audience has grown. We added 115 new names to our email list from people that attended our webinars in the last 2 weeks of March, and 70 new names just in April alone. So that's 190 people that had not been on our email list, had not been really part of our community before. So that's really exciting to me. We've touched people as far away as Boston and Ohio, North Carolina, Atlanta, and many of them have gotten back to me and emailed me or reached out to me and said, nobody in my community has stepped up to do what you're doing. So I'm really thrilled to be able to be a part of your community and learn or get on a coffee chat. So I think it's good. We are watching metrics. Our social media interactions have gone up. Obviously, our email list has grown. And, at the end of the day, I feel like we're adding value to the community.
I agree. I think that everything local is now national and even global. We're seeing that even at our Toastmasters Club. We had a member who moved to Hawaii rejoin the club because she can participate from Hawaii. We just signed up a new member who is disabled and would find it difficult, to come to physical meetings. So we're probably going to go hybrid as a club. Even when we eventually sit in the same room, we're going to still be using Zoom or whatever the best things at the time. So maybe we'll do that with Creative Coast too.
I think so. I definitely feel like we've reached a lot of people. I've had a lot of conversations with some partners up in Charleston and various other cities about what they're doing. And they're actually now sharing our content with people because they're not producing content. They're just focused on the office space issues. I did go into the space yesterday. I did rearrange it. So we now have 7 work spots that can be socially distanced where people can come in and start working as soon as the board is ready to make that decision. So I've been working on my COVID-19 reopen plan. I know people are sick of being at home, so I know people are going to want to use the conference room and occasionally come in as things reopen, but I want to make sure that we're doing it safe. So that's been priority there.
Yeah, that's great. And I do have some questions or follow up on your excellent presentation. First of all, let's see here. I have about the traditional job titles point. Unfortunately, investors and sometimes even seed investors and then angel investors and certainly venture capital people say, okay, show me your team, and they want to have people in these roles. And I think that this is half a comment, half a question. How do you resist that? Where they're making you almost make up people and make up titles.
Yeah, I think you can get away with saying founder. So like the two people that are really starting the company, or 4 people, you can say, hey, this is the founder that's in charge of operations. This is the founder that's in charge of technology. You can say this is the founder in charge of marketing, right? I think it's fine to say director or VP instead of C for anybody other than the CEO. And I think with especially angel investors will take founder instead of CEO. When you start getting to that Series A, you definitely need to be talking titles. But hopefully you're a little larger at that point. The other thing you can do is that we did with my very first startup is we said, okay, somebody has to be CEO. The investors were saying somebody has to be CEO. It was so-and-so's idea. They're going to be the CEO. And have that honest conversation and know. We had a conversation one night. I can remember it because we were at the Highland Tap having steaks, right? It was like a celebration. Something had happened and we were like, okay, so we're going to go out and treat ourselves to a nice dinner. And so I had 3 other co-founders. So the 4 of us were sitting there having steaks at the Highland Tap in the basement of this bar in Atlanta and drinking a really nice bottle of wine. And we were having an honest conversation. We were pitching investors and we were really close. And they said, okay, we're preparing for kind of like the last phase of due diligence with some of these investors. And they're going to look at us and they're going to all say, like, you guys are like 20s, like high 20s, low, upper 20s-ish. Like, how can you, like, we were going to have to bring in some gray hairs. We call them gray hairs at the time. We're going to have to bring in some gray hairs to help manage this company. What's your answer? Because we knew somebody was going to ask us that question. So we had to get comfortable with the idea that we would be willing to take a boss at some point. It turned out that probably killed the company. So I don't know if I would do that again. Because they didn't understand the internet. I mean, in 1999, you couldn't hire a gray hair that understood the internet. So, so I think it's, have those conversations as co-founders. As co-founders, you have to be having some very awkward, awful, hard conversations about equity, about what happens if one of you gets hit by a bus or gets sick, or just doesn't love the business 3 years from now and wants out. Right. And so you have to have those conversations. And one of those questions can be like, okay, you're going to be CTO for now, but like, what happens if you don't like that job and we need to hire somebody to actually manage the people because you really just want to be the lead architect? Right. What do we do then? Are you okay with that? Right. I think you just have to have those hard conversations up front in order to figure out whether or not they're a good co-founder or partner.
Yeah, and then I would agree as a corollary that if there is a CEO, in fact, I've done a pitch at at some of the boot camps, how the CEO equals the CSO, the Chief Sales Officer. Yeah. I mean, if the CTO, really smart tech person, says, "Oh, I want to be CEO," only if that person can quickly and happily be the chief salesperson for the company too. I mean, I agree with you in spades about that.
So I have a situation right now with somebody that I'm coaching who's very technical, doesn't have a co-founder at this point. I said, look, if you're going to continue to be this way, you're going to have to get a co-founder that's sales. Because, and I did it myself for a while, right? My first time as a CEO, I have a technical background. So I could lose an entire day trying to fix some little bug that I thought was important that really wasn't important instead of making my sales calls, because the sales calls are uncomfortable, right? And as the technology person, you're going to potentially, do what's easy, right? Do what you're comfortable with, right? And so that means you might fall back on not being in the role that you're in today, which is like get up and make 5 sales calls first, and so I had to get really, really conscious about how I scheduled my day. And like, okay, if there's a bug that I don't like in the software that I have the ability to fix, I can do A, first make my sales calls, B, let my CTO co-founder know that I'm going to go in and tweak that. I had access to the code. He had access to the code. It was all source code controlled, so it wasn't like I was overstepping his bounds, but I wanted to make sure he knew, right? So, I mean, that took a lot for me to just be conscious of my bias as a technologist, to go back to what I'm really comfortable doing was the technology, instead of focusing on what was better for the company and was better for my own personal development and growth, was making those sales calls.
Thanks. And I'm sure there are other questions too.
Any other questions? I've got something in chat. Oh, Great presentation. Talk later. Awesome. Kat had to drop off. If there's no other questions, then I'll go ahead and close this out. Let me stop recording.